I'll make it
So
work.
I can get us, yep. So welcome everybody. We are here tonight to talk about special education and some of the procedures that we have in place, just to give you an overview and allow you to get a good sense of the transition from CPSE to CSE, which is really the preschool world to the kindergarten world. First, my name is Bethany Nightingale. I am the coordinator of special education, overseeing preschool and the elementary age group. Lori and I work closely together. Lori?
Yep. Hi, and I'm Lori Newcomer. I'm your committee on preschool special education chairperson. I'm also a district school psychologist, and I have been lucky enough to be working with all of these preschoolers for the past 12 years and 8 years before that in an elementary school with our K through 2. So just be glad to share with you tonight some of those next steps, help you know what the process is going to look like, and hopefully answer a lot of questions for you as we move through this. So the first part that's going to happen is that we're going to have your Committee on Preschool Special Education annual review. And at that meeting, many of those many people have already received your invitations. Those are starting next week, and at that meeting, we're going to review progress. We're going to be looking at progress for this year. We're going to make decisions in terms of eligibility and need for services during the summertime. And we will also make formal or determine any recommendations to have the Committee on Special Education do a transition review, which is what we are doing to look at whether or not children continue to need services moving into kindergarten. I'm sorry, having some technical difficulties. I can see this on one screen, not the other. So one question that I get asked a lot is continuation automatic when a child goes into kindergarten? It's not. Not every child needs to continue going into kindergarten. Those decisions are made individually for each child. And we begin looking at that. We've actually begun looking at that early. We start planning by looking at how everybody's doing this fall into January, and make those formal decisions, like I said, at the annual review. So some children will be declassified at the annual review. And that just means that your child has met their goals. They no longer meet the eligibility criteria to need supports and services through special education. And declassification can happen at different times. Some children will be declassified in the springtime, although that's more rare. But there are times when children met all of their goals and they're moving forward, and it's when everybody is on the same page that the child's ready to finish with that program. Other children we're going to look at declassification, but we plan for it at the end of the school year because they're still finishing up on some goals. There's still some things that we need to work on. And others, while it's more rare, it can happen at the end of the summertime. So sometimes children need the summer program, but then they can finish up at the end of that point. What happens next, right? If your child is declassified. So what happens is that we have all of these preschool records. And if your child's going to be declassified, it is your choice whether or not we share those records with the elementary school. So at the annual reviews, I will be asking all parents if you would like to sign consent to release your records. If you do, and then we get that consent back, what we do is we share those records electronically with the school that we expect your child to be attending in the fall. So we do this much later in the school year because we don't know for sure where everybody is going. But at that point, we share those records. They're shared for a certain period of time, and the buildings are expected to copy the records they need, have the things that they need available to them. It's also helpful, it can be helpful for parents to once you know who your teacher is and you're going to have orientation, to let your teacher know. They can watch out for things. Say your child has finished up and they had been working on fine motor skills, or then the teacher knows that there was this background, knows there was this work done on those skills, and they can watch out. So that can be a helpful thing too.
We then take teams within buildings. So it may not necessarily be the team or the building that you would think your child would go to. You won't know what school they're assigned to, as said in the earlier presentation, until July. So the team may not be the school representing where your child will end up. But that team will take and look at all of the records. They will then go out to the setting that your child is at and be able to observe them within that setting. Interview any of the staff that is currently working with your child, and get a well-rounded picture between the records and what happens day to day in the preschool setting. They will then from there determine if we have enough information. And if we need any additional information, we would reach out to you and discuss any um, assessments or reevaluations that would need to be completed. That often is not likely something that we have to do or need, but we would definitely keep you posted and seek your consent for that. Following that point, we would schedule a CSE meeting. So a building psychologist would talk to you, set up a date that works for you, as well as the school team. And at the team, we would then go through all of the information together. So any of the past records, the observations, and the feedback we got from the team, as well as any information and input that you had to share with the team, as you're a valuable part of the team and the committee. From there, we would determine if your child qualified for a school age IEP and then make the steps forward with that. Next slide.
So there's some similarities and some differences between both of these committees. At the Committee on Preschool Special Education, when we're looking at eligibility, we get to look at it in 5 areas. We are looking at cognitive development, adaptive skills, communication, social development, and motor skills. We can look at the impact in any one of those areas when it meets eligibility criteria. And overall, we're looking at how it impacts a child's ability to participate in age-appropriate activities. It's very different at the CSE level, and Bethany's going to talk about that.
So at the CSE level, we really look at the access to that academic education setting. So what is impacting them to access the academics independently, and what might they need to do that? As Lori said, with a preschool IEP, children are identified as a preschooler with a disability. When we come into a school age IEP, we delve in a little bit deeper per the New York State guidelines. And we look at 13 potential areas of classification that could impact them. The purpose of that is to choose the classification that is the first and foremost component that is impacting them. Despite which one we would choose, we would still provide the same level of service. So on the next slide, I go over the 13 areas. I won't delve into each one of these, but this is the areas that we have that we can go through and talk about. Often when I am running a meeting, I will give you several examples of the 13 areas, just so that you know, have a good sense and understanding of what they are. They're also listed in the parental rights that are mailed home to you. Um, and then I narrowed down to a couple, you know, often a couple or maybe just one, based on what information that we've heard, and really help tie it to that information so that you have some understanding of how these classifications could connect with the information we're hearing. So then what we do is we choose the one that is the first and foremost that is impacting based on your child. And then we generate an IEP supporting your child and what they might need as we move forward.
The next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about some choices, some different, yeah, it's really choices that parents have, and it's based on a child's birth date. I get a lot of questions about this every year. So there is, in New York State, you're school age eligible for the school year when your child will turn 5 on or before December 1st. But also in New York State, there's what's called a compulsory age. It's the age where you have to send your child, and that's not until a child is 6. So you have this gap for some children, and parents can make a choice whether or not to send their children to kindergarten or to stay back. When a child's receiving special education services, there are other things to also to consider for that. So on the next slide, I can go over a number of the different options there are. There's some parents, most parents are going to send their child to kindergarten within the school district. Some will send their child for another year of preschool, which can be hard to find because there's not all preschools take children who are school age, but there are some. There are some where a child will stay home. There are times when a parent will choose to send their child to a private school. When you do that, some of those private schools have junior kindergartens, but other times they are kindergartens. And some of those programs are within our district, but others, parents may also send their child to a private school that's out of the district. Every one of those different options leads to different kinds of planning and different kinds of outcomes. And I'm going to share more on the next slide. So in all cases, in order to receive special education supports, New York State requires that your child be considered a kindergartner. It can be a little confusing when you're still going to a daycare, staying home, or attending a junior K. But in order for us to continue providing special education supports in our system, they're listed as a kindergartner. But it doesn't mean that we wouldn't be looking at it differently, like in the following year. Each of these options requires different levels of planning, such as most of those where it's staying at home, going to a preschool, or choosing any of the private schools within our district boundaries. There's one avenue that we're looking at. But when you're planning to send your child to a preschool that's out, or a daycare, a kindergarten outside of our district boundaries, then there's another way that everything has to be planned for. I'm going to be talking with every family about that at the annual review. I will ask what your plans are, and then I will talk with you in detail because it's very individualized. It more than I could share today. It really drills down, and it's very different for each child. But we can go through all of that once I know what you're thinking about. Now, I know my annual reviews are early in order to be able to see all of the children, but they're in January, February, and early March for all of the older children. And so you may not, be 100% sure of your plans, but if you're thinking about it, I'm going to take you through what all of those different options mean, how we would plan for them, what your next steps would be. And then at the following Committee on Special Education meetings, they're going to ask you again, and they're going to talk with you as well about what those next steps would be. And at that point, you're getting probably closer to making some of your decisions. The district does need, and it's New York State law that says that they need to have a formal written request made to them by June 1st. I have a template for parents to help make that easier for everybody. And we follow up really closely to make sure that we get all of those in by that June 1st date. So, and it doesn't mean if you put that letter in by June 1st, there are times when parents might change their minds after that June 1st letter. It's not like a commitment that you can't change your mind on. You can. But we really do need that by June 1st in order to plan appropriately.
So on our next slide, we did talk earlier in the earlier presentation about registration, but registration, regardless of what route you choose for servicing and receiving the IEP services, you still would need to register with the school district. So that would include if you're attending our elementary schools, any local private school, or any even if you're staying home for the year, that would be a registration. If you choose to have your child attend a school in another school district, then you must register with that district. So if you live in our district, you would register with the other district, letting them know that you live with us, and then they would reach back to us and ask us to pay and provide the service, allow them to provide the service. If this is done, this would need to be a written letter notifying us prior to that June 1st time. Some of these options are confusing, and as Lori said, it definitely will be a one-on-one conversation during the meetings so that she can kind of help guide you a little bit more through it.
And with that kindergarten registration for the families that are choosing to go to send their child to a school that's outside of our district region, you actually end up registered with both districts because you have to register with us for us to be able to share records with the next district.
Thank you.
So then we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the differences between the Committee on Preschool Special Education and then the School Age Committee on Special Education. We, at the preschool level, we have related services, and those can be speech language therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy. Sometimes it's a teacher of the visually impaired, sometimes it's a teacher of the deaf, sometimes there's counseling or parent counseling and training. All of the related services, the location, it can be provided at the preschool level. It can be provided in the home. It could be in a daycare. It could be in a preschool setting or even in a community setting. The related services that we have, most often those recommendations end up being individual because we're not in, if your child's, there's too many choices in terms of where all the children are, and it's really not able to coordinate group at the preschool level. And then social work, one thing that we can do is that the parent counseling and training can be provided in the home. And Bethany's going to talk about what's the same and what things are different at the preschool level for the related services.
So when we get to school age or CSE, related services, all the same that Lori talked about, are available and offered right within the school district. The location is right within the elementary school buildings. So the kiddos get the service throughout their school day. We make sure that we plan the service around the academic time periods and around those fun time periods so that they're really not missing the social aspects as well as those academic pieces. The related services are more often in groups once we get into the school age. This is for a number of things, but first, because they are available and right within the classes, but also because they learn a lot from one another. So when you have a group of 2 or 3, they can often model for one another, learn various components depending on the type of service that they're receiving and what the students' needs are. We do still have the availability to provide individual service, but we often find that those groups are more effective. Social works provide counseling, social workers provide counseling right in the school. One of the big shifts is that our social workers will communicate with the families, but they provide direct service and support to the kids. We do not provide the family counseling once we get in within the school walls. You'll find that you have a lot of wraparound services and supports of the classroom teacher communicating and any of the providers that are working with you communicating. We're going to talk a little bit about programming and what that looks like. So at the preschool level,
Yep. When we're saying programming, what we mean is that a special education teacher is providing support in some way. So at the preschool level, there are 3 different ways that can happen. There are special education itinerant teacher services that can occur in your child's childcare setting, wherever they're attending, whether it's a daycare or a preschool. There are times when we are sending the special education teacher into that classroom. That typically happens, it's always an hour session, and it usually happens just a couple days or a few days a week. The next level of service with a special education teacher that is at the preschool level they're called special classes in an integrated setting. And it's important to remember, it's a special class in an integrated setting. What it means is that we actually have a special education teacher there all day, and they're going into a classroom where there already is a preschool teacher there all day. They typically have at least one other adult in the classroom, and most often 2 other adults in that room. And then we have special classes. So those classrooms are when there's a special education teacher there all day, but the classroom student numbers are much lower. They are 2/3 the size to less than half the size of what one of those integrated special classes and integrated settings can look at like. So it's a much higher level of teacher support, and they're really focusing on underlying foundational skills at that point in those rooms. So it's a higher level of support there.
and then at the school age, we have what's called integrated co-teach. That's where a special education teacher pushes right into the kindergarten classroom for 2 hours a day and supports right alongside the classroom teacher. With that model, we also have the ability to add TA support if a student needs it for 2.5 hours a day. So essentially, there could be 2 adults within the room supporting throughout the school day. We have special classes. These classes range in size depending on the class. Each class is based on a different set of needs for students and supporting them. We have a few classes that serve students of a class size of 8, some of a class size of 9, up to a class size of 12. Those are supported with a special education teacher all day. And then depending on the class, there's TAs right within the room all day also supporting. And then we also have special classes out of the district. So if we have a kiddo that we are unable to meet their needs, or we do not have enough room in our class options, then we would look outside of the district to find something that would best meet their needs. All of these things we talk through and we make careful decisions together and have opportunities to look at, as we're making them.
There's one other option. There's another option that is we use in some cases, and it's something called the 504 plan. Sometimes children have been in Committee on Preschool Special Education receiving supports but we're no longer, we're really focusing on at this point. We get to a point where we just need to provide mostly accommodations, and the needs that we're finding are really related to being able to access an educational environment. When a child has a specific diagnosis or medical needs, they have access to the civil rights legislation and a 504 plan. 504 plans generally focus on accommodations. They're those kinds of extra supports and things that they're doing within the classroom to make the child successful, but we're not necessarily, we no longer need we typically do not need special education teacher support. And those plans do not have goals in them like you see in an individualized education program. So, and what would happen at the CPSE annual review, if that's what we think we're looking at moving forward to need, then that's what we would be talking about making a recommendation for. And the buildings would then be given that information and be following up with you to hold a 504 meeting later in the spring to develop one of those plans.
So some things that you can do to help prepare for the transition, you know, as we've talked a lot, really familiarizing yourself with this whole process. So this gives you definitely a good step forward with that. Sharing names of individuals or agencies that you've worked with, that will definitely help make those connections so that all of the providers are on the same page and, you know, have that same information. Sharing those CPSE records if that hasn't already been done, or any outside evaluations. It's not uncommon that kiddos get outside evaluations over the summer or at different time periods. And any of that information is always helpful for us. And then always feel free to ask questions, you know, prepare those questions. You can reach out to Lori or myself at any time. And then once you're established with the school, there'll be definite people that you know that you're able to contact and will readily answer any questions you have there.
And then on this last slide, we've given you a lot of the contact information that you need. We've listed out, like if you had scheduling questions, things about meeting dates, or any other basic questions. At the preschool level, the Committee on Preschool Special Ed, Evelina Schretzelmeyer can support you. And at the school age level, Heather Bates would support. For the questions that are related to CPSE, special education planning, all those individual things for your child, that's where you can reach out to me. We have that information, my contact there. And for questions really specific to Committee on Special Education, we have Bethany's contact, as well as Caitlin Lewis, who is the Elementary Committee on Special Education chairperson as well. And then I was looking at questions. I see one question where someone has asked if a child is recommended for a CSE transition review, with the CSE meeting take place after case screening, to take into account the information that is collected there. And I let Bethany, you wanted to.
Yep.
Take that one.
So, yep, I just had to reread it. Yes, so case screening information is definitely something that we can take into account and use to support. But that would be one component of all of the information that we have. So, depending on if the kiddo is in a preschool already or receiving services, we would use all of that, as well as any information that would come out of reports. Of course, information from the parents, as well as the case screening information. So it's a whole collective piece. And then from that, we would determine if they qualify or continue to qualify.
But the kindergarten screening is held this year in June 3rd, 4th, and 5th. way more children that will be going to kindergarten, needing CSE meetings than there are days in June. So those meetings will, most of those meetings are going to be held before kindergarten screening has taken
Oh,
place,
thank you.
because it would be
Sorry.
impossible to hold all of those meetings in June. So
Thank you, Lori. I read it wrong.
that's okay.
Yep.
And that's the only question I saw.
Yep.
So.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. We really appreciate it, and feel free to reach out to either of us if you have any further questions that we can help you with.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks for
everybody.
attending. Have a good night.
Appreciate it.